At my son's wedding in Aspen, my daughter-in-law turned to my wife and whispered loud enough for the whole room to hear, "Get down, lick my shoes clean." All because she spilled a little food. The music didn't stop. The guests didn't react. My son stood right there, silent, like this was normal. And in that moment I realized something. Some weddings don't bring families together. They tear them apart. If this story touches you, please subscribe to the channel to stay with stories like this, real family stories, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. And back then, in that cold room of glass and light, my wife just stood there in silence. That was when everything started to slip out of control. The music kept playing after those words. The violins went on, steady, cold, like the glass walls surrounding the glass manor. No one screamed, no one stepped forward. Everything flowed on as if this were just a tiny flaw in a perfect evening. I was standing less than 10 feet away. I saw my wife's shoulders stiffen. Mary didn't cry. She only lowered her head slightly, a habit shaped over many years. The habit of someone who is always afraid of being a burden. Jennifer stood perfectly straight. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her confidence came from somewhere else. From money. From power. From knowing without doubt that this room belonged to her. Her custom-made white wedding dress spilled onto the cold marble floor. A dark stain of truffle soup spread across it. Not large, but enough to break the perfection she had paid so much for. Mary was still holding the empty tray. She had slipped. I knew that. I had seen the floor slick with melted snow from the guests' shoes. But in this room, reasons didn't matter. Only appearances did. "I told you to be careful," Jennifer continued, her voice flat. "This isn't a charity kitchen." A few people turned away. Not out of shame. They just didn't want to be involved. In Aspen, people learn how to stay silent very early. Michael stood beside his wife. My son wore a tailored suit, flawless in every line. I looked at him, waiting for something familiar. A frown, a step forward, anything. There was nothing. He simply took a sip of wine, his eyes fixed on the glass. "Mom, just do it," he said, without looking at Mary. "Don't make this more complicated." The words weren't loud, but they were heavy. Heavier than the glass room itself. Mary turned toward me. Her eyes were apologetic. Not to Jennifer. To me. As if she were saying, "I'll finish this quickly. Don't let things get worse." I watched her set the tray down. Her hands trembled slightly. Those hands had once sewn Michael's clothes when the factory shut down. They had scrubbed grease from my skin every winter night in Maine. Now they hesitated before a pair of white silk shoes. Jennifer stepped back half a pace, just enough for everyone to see. She wanted this witnessed. She wanted a line drawn right here. "Go on," she said, again calm as ever. "Lick it. Then I'll pretend nothing happened." I heard someone inhale sharply, very softly. Then silence fell again. I looked around. The glass walls reflected us into dozens of versions. In every one of them, Mary looked smaller. And suddenly I understood something with painful clarity. This room was built to show off light, but it had no space for compassion. Just minutes earlier, it was Jennifer who had asked Mary to help serve the food. "To save on staff," she said. "It feels warmer when family helps." I saw Mary smile, a little embarrassed, but she nodded. She always believed that if she could help her child, she should. Now that warmth was gone. All that remained was a cold order, those above and those below. Mary began to bend down. Not right away. She paused for a beat, as if reminding herself to keep her balance. I could see the strain in her neck. Her back was no longer straight. In that moment, I didn't think about Jennifer. I thought about the long road that brought us here. Years of saving every dollar. The old clothes Mary kept wearing so Michael wouldn't fall behind his friends. I thought about how we stood at this wedding. Not as parents, but as people, allowed to be present only if they stayed quiet. And I saw the bitterest irony of all. This was my son's wedding. Yet it was the place where my wife was treated as if she didn't belong. The music shifted. Laughter rose from a distant corner. Time kept moving. And as Mary prepared to lower herself even further, I understood something else. If I stayed still any longer, some things would never stand up again. Not the dress, not the shoes, but something far deeper than that. That moment pulled me far back, to the years before Aspen entered my son's life like a ticket out. I remembered winter mornings in Maine. Snow buried the entrance to the lumber shop. I had to shoulder the door open because the hinges were frozen solid. There was no heater, just the smell of damp wood and the steady sound of the saw. I worked in an old jacket. My hands were so cracked that every nail I gripped sent a sharp sting through my fingers. I never complained. Mary didn't either. We only told each other one thing. Michael needed a warm new coat for school, and that was enough. Back then, Michael was a quiet kid. He was smart. He was ambitious. I was proud of that. When he got into a good school, Mary sold her wedding ring, the one that had grown dull with time, to help pay the tuition. She didn't tell me. I only noticed when her hand was bare. She smiled and said, "I'm used to it." We were used to stepping back, as long as our son could move forward. Then Jennifer entered the picture. I met her for the first time at a restaurant in Boston. She was polite, proper. Her eyes were quick and sharp. I remember thinking, this is a girl who is used to being listened to. When she talked about her family's resorts, Michael sat a little straighter. When she talked about Aspen, his eyes lit up, like he was seeing a different world. After that, everything moved fast. The proposal, the wedding plans, long emails written in cold, precise language. Then one afternoon, Jennifer invited Mary and me to meet to align on a few details. The agreement lay on the table. Thin, white, just a formality, she said. At the reception, since there will be many important guests, we'd prefer that you don't identify yourselves as the groom's parents. It helps keep things tidy. Mary read every line. She didn't understand all the terms, but she understood the meaning. I looked at Michael. He avoided my eyes. "It's just one day," he said. "After that, everything will be fine." We signed. Not because we agreed, but because we were used to giving way. 6 months before the wedding, I started making a dining set for Michael. Old walnut wood, beautiful grain. I had saved it for years, for something special. I worked slowly, carefully. I wanted it to last longer than any party ever could. When I finished, Mary stood there looking at it for a long time. She said, "He'll love it." But Michael never saw that table. The cleaning crew took it away. A gardener whispered to me that Michael had told them to burn it, because it didn't fit the modern style. I never told Mary. Now all those memories collapsed into this one moment, as my wife bent toward the cold stone floor. I could see the line had been drawn long ago. Today it was just more visible. Jennifer glanced at her watch, not because she was in a hurry, but to remind us that everyone's time mattered, except ours. "We don't have all day," she said. Michael shifted his feet. I heard him exhale. He didn't look at me. He stared into the empty space ahead, as if not looking might make it pass. In my mind, one question kept repeating. When does silence become complicity? I realized this wedding wasn't just about Jennifer. It was the result of all the times I had chosen silence before. I had taught Michael that dignity could be folded up, put away, when it was inconvenient. I looked at Mary. She wasn't asking for help. That hurt even more. She had accepted this role long ago, like an old coat. Not pretty, but familiar. Around us, the guests began to grow uneasy. Not out of sympathy. They were afraid the party would be disrupted. In places like this, discomfort is not welcome. I heard someone whisper, "Why don't they just get it over with?" That sentence made one thing clear to me. If this was over, it would be over with my wife disappearing from this room, both literally and in every other way. Mary bent lower. I saw her reflection in the glass wall. Warped, small. That image overlapped with years of her standing behind me in the lumber shop, quietly sweeping sawdust. A woman who had lived her whole life trying not to trouble anyone, now being asked to prove her submission in front of a crowd. And right then, amid the music, the lights, and the white snow outside, I understood this. If I didn't step forward now, whatever was broken today could never be repaired. Not by any apology that came later. I stepped toward Mary. Slowly, very slowly. The room still hadn't realized that something had begun to change. I placed my hand on Mary's shoulder before she could bend any lower. Her shoulder was thin, cold, but so familiar that the touch alone told me exactly where I stood. In that moment, the memories stopped crowding in. Everything became clear. I no longer heard the music. I no longer saw the glass walls. I saw only a straight path ahead, a path I had walked for years without ever naming it. The people in that room looked at me like I didn't belong. An old carpenter in a worn suit standing among clothes tailored to impress. I understood that feeling. I had lived with it for a long time. They didn't know who I was, and I had never needed them to. For many years I worked under a name that wasn't my own, not to be mysterious, but because the work required silence. People called me the ghost carver, the one they called when something truly valuable needed to be preserved, not displayed, but allowed to endure. I restored wooden staircases in historic buildings, doors that had stood for 3 centuries, details where a single mistake would erase a piece of history forever. I never signed my work. I never appeared in photos. I finished the job, and I left. I never told Michael any of this. I thought he didn't need to know. I believed a father's worth didn't come from titles. It turns out, I was wrong. I felt my phone vibrate lightly in my jacket pocket just as Mary straightened up because my hand held her in place. I didn't take it out right away. I knew who it was. My lawyer only contacted me when something couldn't wait. The message was short. No greeting. Robert, the European deal is on hold. They need your professional confirmation. The buyer's financial situation is deteriorating. Your decision will determine everything. I looked at Jennifer. She was frowning not with anger, but with impatience. And I saw the almost chilling symmetry of it all. Her family was trying to acquire a historic estate to convert it for commercial use. A project the press praised as preservation combined with development. But I had reviewed the documents. I knew it would only stand if someone certified that the artistic value was truly respected. And that someone was me. I had never imagined meeting the buyer's family like this. I had certainly never imagined they would become my in-laws. Jennifer didn't know. Michael knew even less. I looked around. The guests began to whisper. Not because they understood, but because they felt the air had shifted. Silence was no longer convenient. It had become heavy. Jennifer lowered her voice. "This has gone on long enough," she said. "We're wasting everyone's time." She turned to Mary as if my wife were still just a problem to be handled quickly. "I'm saying this one last time." I realized something almost ironic. Jennifer believed she was in control, when in truth she was standing on ground she didn't understand. I took my phone out. Not to call yet, just to place it on the nearby table. The screen lit up for a brief moment. A few people noticed the name. I saw Jennifer's father across the room, the man who had spent the evening shaking hands and smiling. He stopped. His gaze stayed on me longer than it should have. He recognized it. Not who I was, but that something had slipped off its safe trajectory. Michael stepped closer to me for the first time since it began. "Dad," he whispered. "What are you doing?" I looked at my son. For the first time that day I met his eyes. I saw confusion, not because his mother had been humiliated, but because he felt control slipping away. "I'm just standing where I'm supposed to stand," I said. Jennifer let out a thin smile. "Who do you think you are?" she asked. "This isn't your workshop." Her words didn't make me angry. They only confirmed something. She had built her entire world on the assumption that power always comes from what can be seen. Money, glass, lights. I had spent my life working with things that outlast the lights. I touched Mary's shoulder again. She stood upright, not from confidence, but because she no longer had to bend. I saw her fingers clutch the edge of her dress. She didn't ask what I planned to do. She just stood there, as she had beside me for decades. Another message came right after. "They're waiting for your response. If you refuse, the entire project will be frozen." I took one last look around the room. I looked at my son. I looked at my daughter-in-law, still believing everything was within her grasp. And I understood something then. My true identity had never been a secret. I simply had never needed to use it, until today. I didn't respond right away. I left the phone resting on the table, as if it were just another lifeless object. The silence stretched a few seconds longer, long enough for the room to grow impatient. Jennifer raised an eyebrow. "If you're not going to do anything," she said, "then please step aside." Mary shifted slightly. I felt the familiar hesitation in her body, a reflex worn deep over time. But this time, I didn't let her retreat. I kept my hand on her shoulder. Not tight, just firm enough to remind her she didn't have to handle this alone anymore. I stepped forward half a step. Not fast, not dramatic, just an ordinary step. Still, a few guests instinctively stepped back. They didn't know why. They only felt that the order of the room had just been touched. On the nearby table sat a plate of soup untouched. I looked at it for a moment, not out of anger, but because I understood the meaning of small gestures when placed correctly. I picked up the plate. My hand didn't shake. Years of working with fragile things had taught me balance. I walked toward Jennifer. She looked at me, her eyes mixed with irritation and contempt. "Are you trying to cause trouble?" she asked. I didn't answer. I simply tilted the plate slightly, letting the remaining soup flow onto her still clean silk shoes. Not rushed, not forceful, just enough for the stain to bloom clearly against the white. The room froze. No one screamed. No one clapped. The music stopped in the middle of a long note, then died completely. I heard someone set a glass down too hard. Jennifer looked down at her shoes. Her expression changed, but not because of the shoes. Because for the first time, someone had refused to play by her rules. I placed the plate back on the table. "These shoes may be very expensive," I said, my voice steady, neither raised nor lowered. "But they're standing on a boundary you just crossed." She opened her mouth, but no words came right away. Her father had already stepped forward a few paces. He wasn't looking at the shoes. He was looking at me, and I knew he was connecting the pieces. Michael stood frozen. He looked at Jennifer, then at me. For the first time, I saw real fear in my son's eyes. Not fear of losing his wife, fear of losing his position. "What are you doing, Dad?" he asked, his voice rough. I turned to him. "I'm stopping something you should have stopped a long time ago." Jennifer let out a short laugh. "You think this little act changes anything," she said. "Security." No one moved. The uniformed staff near the door looked to the manager. The manager looked to Jennifer's father. Jennifer's father gave no signal. I picked up my phone again. This time I turned on the speaker. "This is Robert," I said. "I am withdrawing all professional certification related to the preservation project, currently awaiting approval, until there is a full review of the developer's ethical standing." The voice on the other end didn't question it. There was a brief pause. Then a clean response. "Understood." I ended the call. No further explanation was needed. Those who understood, understood. Those who didn't began to sense the consequences by watching Jennifer's father's face change. He moved closer, faster now, no longer wearing the calm stride of a host. "We can talk privately," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I don't think so," I replied. "What needed to be said has already been said here." Michael took a step forward, then stopped. "Dad," he said, this time pleading. "This isn't worth—" I looked at my son for a long moment. I didn't see hatred. I saw a vast emptiness, where understanding should have been. "You let your mother bow before others," I said slowly, "because you were afraid of losing a position. So stand right there and take a good look at what that position is built on." Jennifer turned to her father. "Dad," she said quickly, "say something." He didn't answer right away. He was calculating. Not honor, but numbers, contracts, and time. I could see it clearly. The room began to buzz. A few guests took out their phones, not to record, but to check messages. In places like this, bad news spreads faster than wine. Mary stood beside me. She said nothing, but I felt her hand stop trembling. She no longer looked at Jennifer. She looked straight ahead, as if for the first time that evening she was allowed to. Jennifer glanced down at her shoes again. She didn't ask anyone to clean them. She understood that any request now would be meaningless. Michael stood between us and her family, like a bridge no one wanted to cross anymore. I took a slow breath. I didn't feel triumph. I felt something placed back where it belonged. Outside, the snow kept falling. White, cold, but at least in this room, there was one person who no longer had to bow. We left the glass manor without asking anyone's permission. No one called after us. No one saw us off. The automatic glass doors opened, letting the cold air rush in, then closed behind us, as if nothing had ever happened. Mary walked slowly beside me. The snow sank under our shoes, making soft sounds. I reached out my hand. She took it right away. Her hand was still cold, but it wasn't shaking anymore. The luxury car Michael had arranged for us was parked right at the entrance. I looked at it for a second, then shook my head. I placed the keys on the stone ledge right under the light, not out of pride, simply because I didn't want to carry anything connected to that night. At the end of the drive, a gray truck was waiting. The Conservation Trust logo was faint on the door. The driver nodded when he saw me. No questions, no small talk. He just opened the back door. Mary turned for one last look at the glass manor. In the glass reflection, she saw a gray-haired woman in simple clothes standing upright. She exhaled softly. "Let's go," she said. We got in. When the door closed, the distant music vanished completely. All that remained was the steady hum of the engine and the dark road leading out of Aspen. I didn't ask Mary how she felt. Some questions don't need answers right away. We sat in silence for a long time. Then she rested her head on my shoulder, the way she used to on long drives years ago. 3 months later, I heard that Jennifer's family corporation had multiple projects frozen. There were no loud announcements, just doors quietly closing, partners withdrawing in silence, promises left hanging, then disappearing. Michael called me once. Just once. He spoke fast. Too much. His voice no longer steady. I listened. I didn't blame him. I didn't comfort him either. When he fell silent waiting, I only said, "I hope you learn how to stand straight before you learn how to stand tall." He never called again. Jennifer filed for divorce. The reason was brief, clean. No one mentioned the wedding night. No one mentioned the shoes. Those things never appeared on paper, but they were still there, in the empty spaces. We moved to Montana as the aspen snow began to melt. A small ranch on the prairie. Nothing remarkable, a simple wooden house, an old workshop that needed fixing. Mary liked it from the first day. She said the wind here didn't make her feel suffocated. I reopened the workshop. Not big. No sign. Just enough room for a few long tables and some tools. Young people started coming, each one carrying an unfinished story. I didn't ask much. I taught them how to listen to wood, how to slow down, how to repair a crack without hiding it. Mary cooked for them. She no longer wore old clothes out of habit or thrift. She wore what made her comfortable. In the evenings we sat on the porch, watching a sky so wide it didn't need glass to show it off. Sometimes I thought about Michael, not with anger, with quiet regret. But I knew everyone has to choose their own stopping point. I had stopped at the right time. One afternoon Mary asked me, "Do you regret making things so big?" I thought for a moment. "No," I said. "I only regret staying silent for so long." She nodded. Nothing more. Time moves slowly in Montana. Slow in a way that lets people realign what went off course. I'm no longer called by my old name in the preservation world. I don't need it. I'm just myself. Opening the workshop each morning. Locking it at night. Hands still smelling of wood. Some things can be built very fast with money. Glass buildings. Shining parties. But I've learned, and I remind the young people here, a family isn't built on height. It's built on how people treat each other when no one is watching. Mary often stands by the door, watching me work. She smiles, not out of pride, out of peace. And in the gentle cold of the prairie mornings, I know this much for sure. Hands may grow rough from labor, but if they are used to lift someone up, they were never dirty. Thank you for staying with this story. If somewhere in it you saw yourself, your parents, or a family that stayed silent for too long, please tap like as a sign of understanding. Share it if you believe this story deserves to travel further, and subscribe to the channel to continue walking with stories about family dignity and the quiet choices that truly matter. I'll see you in the next videos.